Now, so far, everything we've talked about has to do with either preventing users from doing something, so preventing them from adding past a certain point or adding specific types of files. Also, reporting then on the things that you see on your file server. But sometimes can become useful to actually perform actions based off of the presence of a file on a file server. And it's here where we can make use of these file management tasks. Now, for the most part, these file management tasks have a very limited number of uses. They're designed mostly for defining expiration on files. So after a certain number of days of inactivity, go ahead and expire the file to some archival location. It is also used up here for classification management. A little later on in the 412, as we start talking about FCI, the file classification infrastructure, it's that solution that allows you to specifically inject into a file a classification, so a label for the file, that then later on allows you to perform various tasks associated with that label. So you can imagine any file that has the words Project X in it should be labeled as a top secret file. Well, then later on, using classification management, and then also with these file management tasks, you can then define anytime you see a file that happens to have that classification, well, then do something to it, protect it, add additional controls on it, archive it in another location. Well, here with the file management tasks, at least for our purposes here for the 411, we're not going to get into the complexity that's associated with the classification portion. But what I do want to show you is kind of a cool way in which we can use file management tasks to either A, run a script, or B, expire the file. And in this case, what I mean by expire the file is effectively that, to actually take the file, now that it is no longer being used, and then just simply transfer it into some other location for archival purposes. So let's say, for example, that we create this new file management task, so our expiry task. Once we create it, we need to find a scope over here. Let's say group and user files in that same location over there on the E drive. This particular wizard here is a little cantankerous. If you don't actually enter in information, it won't let you move from tab to tab. Once you've done that, we can define what the action will be. So here under file expiration, we have the option of choosing what an expiration directory should be. So maybe after a certain point under companies shared, we should create a new folder here called expired files that will end up transferring these files into. So again, for archival purposes. We could alternatively do a custom script, so some sort of script that we create, or much later on, as we start talking about RMS, rights management services, we could encrypt the file based off of any of the characteristics that we define here in this file management task. Again, RMS is a topic for a completely different exam. Let's say here for this file exploration, we define that for our expired files location. We could then set up notification. So what sort of notification do we want to occur anytime a file gets deemed as expired and moved into that other location? Do we want to generate a report, and where do we want to send it? Are there any conditions associated with that file? So for that file, are there any properties or other operators that are associated with the file? Again, these have most to do with the classification management item over here that we won't talk about until the next exam. What we can, however, do is down here at the bottom, define for expiry things like when that file was last created or modified or accessed, and also any file name patterns as well. So let's say, for example, that anytime a file has not been accessed for a period of 60 days, let's go ahead then and expire the file and move it off into our archival location to just simply get it out of our file server. We can do that here by setting this condition. And then lastly, we can define when we actually want to go through and run this scan. So generally, you typically do these in the middle of the night, just like all your major management tasks. So 3 a.m., for example, being the location or time that we would accomplish that, and then perhaps weekly on every Thursday, for example. Or you could alternatively run that continuously on new files. This is most commonly done when I'm classifying files as part of classification management. But this gives you the ability to create a file management task, and in our case here, just simply automatically expire those files when they're no longer relevant for our users.